Hey guys, hope you're having a good spring break. Sometime during this week, you should be taking your standards mastery on iReady for positive and negative numbers. I'm going to go through it each question so that you can take however long you need to take your standards mastery test, and I will go through each individual question. So let me share my video. All right. So you can stop and start the video however many times you need to make sure that you're answering each question appropriately. All right. So question number 1 says Renee writes a number that is the same distance from 0 as 7 on a number line, but in the other direction. What number did Renee write? So think of a number line. Here's 0. Okay. From 0 to 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. So the distance is 7. Okay. But she wants to go the other direction. Okay, so that's this direction. What number is that? Okay, so you're going to be writing that number in the box. All right, number 2. Look at each of these statements and decide whether each describes a positive or a negative number value. Choose positive or negative for each statement. So question 1 says Marty owes his friend $10. So think about what the word owes means. Okay, and would that be a positive or a negative? Okay. The second one, an office is in a building 5 floors above ground level. So think about the word above. Do you think that's positive or negative? The temperature is 12 degrees below 0. Okay, so again, think about what the word below means. Would that be positive or negative? And the last one here, a cave is located 22 feet below sea level. So again, think of that word below. Do you think it's positive or negative? So you're choosing positive or negative for each one of those. Okay. All right, question 3. Julia drew this number line with points at negative 2.0 and 0.5. Remember, 0.5 is also considered 1/2. Okay, so here's your negative 2.0. Then here is your positive 1/2 or 0.5. Okay. Julia wants to label the opposites of negative 2 and 1/2 on another number line. So you're going to drag each label to its correct position on the number line. So you actually have to drag each answer to where it needs to go. So it wants the opposite of negative 2, and it wants the opposite of 0.5. Okay, so you have to think about what does that mean? What does the opposite of negative 2 mean? And what is the opposite of 1/2? Okay, and where would that be on the number line? If you need to know, remember this is 1/2, this is 1.5, this is 2.5, this is negative 1/2, negative 1 1/2, and negative 2 1/2. Okay, those half marks in between. So drag these two to where they belong, thinking about what opposite means. Okay. Part B of question 3. Julia made these 2 statements. The number 1 is its own opposite, and the second one was the opposite of 1/2 is 1/2. Okay, so think we talked about that in our lesson from earlier this week. Okay, so it says use the drop-down menus to explain whether these statements are true. Okay, so let's look at the first one. Okay, the opposite of 1 is. So think about what the opposite of 1 is. Okay, what is the opposite of 1? Is it -1? Is it 0? Or is it +1? Okay. Then it says the only number that is its own opposite is what? We talked about this also in one of our lessons from earlier this week. So which number has its own opposite? So it doesn't have a positive or a negative, it's just itself. Okay, so which one is that? Is that -1, 0, or 1? Okay. Then the first statement, which remember is this one right here, that number 1 is its own opposite. Is that a true or a false statement? Okay, so think about, does 1 have an opposite? Because according to this, it's saying that it doesn't. 1 is just 1. But what is the opposite of 1? Think about that. Okay, so true or false. All right, now let's look at the second statement. The opposite of 0.5 is 0.5. Okay, so let's break that down. So your first part says, what is the opposite of 0.5? Okay, what is the opposite of 0.5? Is it -5? Is it -0.5? Is it 0? Is it 0.5? Or is it 5? So think about that. What is the opposite of a half? So then the opposite of the opposite, would you go back to 0.5? Okay, so remember, take your 0.5, then find the opposite, and then find the opposite again. Did you go back to your original number? Okay, so the opposite of 0.5 is equal to the opposite of -5, the opposite of -0.5, the opposite of 0, the opposite of 0.5, or the opposite of 5. So what was this, and then what was that? Okay? So then, which is what? So what is the opposite of the opposite? Okay? So is the second statement true? Was the opposite of 0.5, 0.5? Okay, so was your final answer the same as your beginning answer? We talked about this in our lesson earlier this week. Okay, okay, question 4. Plot 1 and 1/2 and its opposite on the number line. Use the point tool. So you're going to use the dot on your screen and place a dot where it belongs. Okay, so you need to place a dot where 1 and 1/2 would be. So think about what that means. Place a dot on your number line. Then what is the opposite of 1 and 1/2? And then place a dot. So you're going to have 2 dots on your graph. One for this number and one for that number. So you're going to have 2. Make sure you have 2 points. And then last question number 5. Sylvia wrote a number that is the opposite of -5. What number did Sylvia write? Okay, so she wants the opposite of -5. Which one of these, -5, 0, 1/5, or +5, is the opposite of -5? Okay, make sure you take your time, go through this before you submit your test, and have a good spring break.